Well, hello there and welcome everybody to another Rowing Chat. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today Rowing Chat is supported by two really excellent organisations. The first is Row Tours. They're a new rowing holiday company headed by Olympian Pete Wells. You can join the Row Tours team in a mini rowing holiday ahead of the World Rowing Championships this summer. Choose from 3, 4 or 6 day rowing tours down the Danube River, starting in Passau and ending at Linz in time for the World Rowing Championships. You can get more information and pricing at rowtours.com/rowing-chat. Our second supporter is Will Ruth. Will is a co-host of Rowing Chat with his own show, The Strength Coach Roundtable. His book, Rowing Stronger, is now in its 2nd edition. The Rowing Chat Network has a special offer just for you. Will has given all of our listeners a free download of chapter 1 of his book. You can get the download from rowing.chat/sponsors and click on the link. Now, today, I'm joined by William de Laszlo. William, welcome to Rowing Chat.
Very excited to be here.
Now, tell the listeners a bit about yourself and your background in rowing.
No problems. Thank you for that. My background in rowing really started actually with more intrigue of my brother who was rowing at a school in England. I was at a school in Scotland where they didn't do rowing, and natural competitive rivalry between two brothers meant that if he can do it, then I can do it. So actually, I started rowing at university, and it was a little bit, because I'm 6'4", quite heavily built. It was a little bit like duck to water. And the university I went to happened to be one of the best rowing universities in the country under the coach Richard Spratley, who drove the senior 8 and the senior 4 there to limits beyond our wildest dreams and expectations. So that was my introduction to rowing, and then I went on to row for the army as well. So you've done competitive flat water rowing, but that's not why I invited you here today, is it? No, absolutely. I mean, we won gold medals representing Great Britain out in Gentsburg and Ratsburg. Ghent and Ratsburg, and yeah, no, that's not why we're chatting today. A very different picture was when we're out on the seas.
Tell us more.
So we did. When I was in the army, I came up with a crazy idea of trying to raise a lot of money for charity, as a friend of mine had died of leukemia, and the crazy idea was to try and do something that had never been done before, and that culminated in me exploring all sorts of rowing related activities. The transatlantic had been done many times, and some of the inland waters kind of races had been done many times, and I came up with the idea to row around the UK, and a lot of people said at the time that it was impossible to do, and that really excited me.
So impossible challenges you eat for breakfast. Why impossible?
I guess I think impossible because nobody had done it before, and then the other side to that is, I think when you think about the UK and its tidal waters, the kind of racing water that rushes around the coast, wind, there's so much to think about. It was, and it's challenging enough to sail around the UK, and I think just a lot of people thought it was impossible. Certainly, a lot of the sailing community said it can't be done, and that was the lure to do something really challenging. And so, therefore, I think that came with that. For me, seeing this friend go through such a tragic experience, suffering from leukemia and ultimately dying, me wanting to take on a challenge that was almost impossible. In hindsight, it's not impossible, and trying to push boundaries from that perspective.
And of course, Ellen MacArthur, I seem to remember her first sailing adventure was exactly the same, sailing around the British Isles and getting into ports when she was extremely young. So we know it has been done. What is it about the geography of the British Isles that makes us such a difficult place to row and sail? Because if I understand correctly, some of the highest tidal ranges in the world exist in this small corner.
That is very, very true. I think when you know less, then often sometimes opportunities seem more exciting, and then when you start to find out more, you start to get more petrified as you got towards the start line. That certainly was my experience. I mean, the headlands around Cape Wrath were extraordinary with the wind coming off. We had 75-mile-an-hour winds coming off the Cape Wrath, which is right at the top of the UK. We had whirlpools, the Corrie Wrekin whirlpool, which is kind of renowned for boats disappearing as you go through it. I think because the way, especially up in Scotland, how huge amounts of water are compressed into very tight gaps. That's what makes some of the UK waters dangerous, but navigated correctly, actually mitigate some of that, I guess, danger and creates kind of like a safe voyage round. So, yeah, it was a phenomenal experience to do it and prove the naysayers wrong, and now very possible to do again.
I remember when I learned to sail, the motto of the sailing school was, remember the sea is safe until you forget that it is dangerous.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the route that having had the idea, you then needed to plan a route. And I'm taking it that you are talking about mainland Britain, not including the island of Ireland. Yeah,
that very good point. So the route, I decided to try and maximize the publicity. We thought we'd have to go from London, so from Tower Bridge, and then arrive back at Tower Bridge. And basically that means you've either got to go, as you go out of the Thames, you've either got to go left or right, and then you just got to keep rowing. And so now the Guinness Book of Records record is set from Tower Bridge, which also makes it exciting for when people wanting to do the race again. We had a very, very lucky weather window that first 7 days, which meant that we could get through the natural prevailing winds for the UK are southwesterly, so pushing up the UK. And we were very lucky we had a 7-day kind of weather window where we thought, okay, well, let's make our break around the south coast to see if we can get to Land's End. And so we decided to go right out of, I'm very dyslexic, so I'm actually looking at my hands at the moment, decided to go right out of the UK and then keep on rowing.
That's fascinating. Can we just digress into Guinness and records and things? What did you have to do in order to get acknowledged? Did they need to be there at the beginning and have it all lined up? Are there restrictions? How do they verify what you've done?
Absolutely. I mean, there's loads of restrictions around the Guinness Book of Records and Guinness World Records as an institution. It has to be professionally recorded. You have to have independent adjudicators. They actually came to the start and finish to verify our time. But it is quite precise in how they manage and monitor it, obviously, because they are the standard for world records. So and we had a sat nav on the boat. And I think the most important thing about the race, the event, was that we did it unsupported. So what that meant was that we weren't allowed to use any man-made objects on the way round. So we weren't allowed to, for example, we could drop our anchor, that's fine, but we weren't allowed to moor up in a harbour or moor up on a buoy. We could have pulled our boat onto a beach to avoid a storm, that's fine, but you weren't allowed to use any man-made objects on the way around, or take any input from kind passing people who might give you a chocolate bar. We actually had to say no to all of that, and we had to just keep on rowing and just say thanks very much.
Very interesting. Did you have a support vessel?
No, we didn't. We had a support land crew that knew where we were when we were, and one of the we certainly touch base a lot with the RNLI and checking in and out of lifeboat stations. They were incredibly supportive of the event. They loved it. It gave them an interesting insight into the speed at someone which travels around the UK, and also monitoring us and passing us from one station to the next. Yeah, so we did it completely unsupported without any external influence.
Now back to your route finding. Did you choose the most direct route? Because there are lots of outlying islands and estuaries and things where maybe shortcuts or non-shortcuts were possible, and presumably tides and rips were a concern. How did you plot where you were going to go? Was it fixed or variable?
It was predominantly down to the Guinness Book of Records said that we had to. It was around UK mainland, so we could cut through from inside islands and what have you. I suppose there are a number of decision points that we had to make. For example, Land's End. Do we go straight out into the Irish Sea? Do we try and use the cover of Ireland on the inside, so you're kind of tracking up the inside of Ireland, or do you just, as I said, go straight down the middle? And in particular, I remember having quite an intense conversation with the crew, because I was the skipper of the boat, saying that we'd been forecast gale force winds going into the Irish Sea, and actually our plan was to try and use Ireland as almost to provide us cover, but we never got across the island, so we're stuck out in the middle of the Irish Sea in one of the most extraordinary storms I've ever been in. Terrifying to a degree. Luckily the wind was behind us, so that it was to a degree pushing us up the Irish Sea, but it was one of those moments that I'll never forget. Would you tell us more? It's sending shivers down my spine even thinking about it. We had as we got out into the eye, well, not the eye of the storm, as we got out into the storm, weather conditions were building. So wind was building and building with the wind behind us, increasing the size of the waves to a point where we were starting to surf down the front of the waves. Now, for anybody who's surfed, that's great if you're going down a wave, but what generally happens is your boat starts to turn to the left or to the right. And if that happened, then our boat would have rolled down the face of waves. So we paved out something like 200 meters of rope. We had our sea anchor out to really try and hold us back, so our boat was being pulled through the waves. And I'll never forget this one moment when we're in the middle of the storm. It's kind of chaos on boat. We are continuing to row because you had to stay on deck the whole time. We're all kind of lashed and strapped in. And I'll never forget these seagulls just playing in the water, probably about 25 meters away from us. And they were in the kind of, as the waves were so big, they were in this kind of stillness of almost pocket of air, and they were just mucking around. And I just remember thinking to myself, we're so vulnerable, we're so small in this huge ocean. And it was one of those real kind of like moments where you think, crikey, I could be fish food in the next 30 minutes, and these things wouldn't care. The life goes on. And really exhilarating. And we got out the other side of it fine, but it was quite an extraordinary experience. Thank you.
Let's go back to the planning of this race. You had the idea. You presumably tried it out on a couple of close friends. How long did it take to plan?
So we had the idea, and really, I was very fortunate. I was in the army at the time, and I ran it via the army kind of internal network, and I had a great commanding officer at the time who was like, "That's a great idea. Could be good PR for the army, but what you're saying is nobody's ever done it before." I was like, "Well, yeah, nobody's ever done it." And he's like, "Well, we're gonna have to manage that carefully." And so I had a very interesting kind of dynamic with the army where they were highly supportive, and it was something for charity, something that I was passionate about, and they also were slightly hands-off in terms of, well, if it failed, they had to have a cover-up story, but if it was successful, it had to be promoted. So it was a very fine balance. But we found an ocean-going rowing boat from flash to bang. It probably took 8 months in terms of preparation, getting kit and equipment together. We found a shell of a boat and really kind of between the four of us, put together the components on that boat, from life rafts to solar panels, and making sure the internal comfort of the boat worked for us. And yeah, so it was roughly about 8 months from having the idea to then being on the water and finding ourselves leaving Tower Bridge with the band playing and not quite knowing whether or not we're going to come back. Because I genuinely thought that it was going to take, we had enough food for us for it to take, I think, about 100 days, 115 days, which meant our boat weighed an absolute ton.
And carrying a genuine, we are talking exactly a ton, or you roughly a ton, and rowing with that sort of load? No.
Yeah, good question. I think it must have at least weighed 1.5 tons. I can't. If you add up the 2.5 kilos for a 24-hour ration pack, we had 100 days worth of food. You know, 4 of us on board the boat itself. You know, you can tot up the maths, and the actual time it took us was 26 days. 26 days, 21 hours and 14 minutes to be precise. But that, you know, that I think anybody doing it again obviously has the advantage of knowing that you need to take maximum of 26 days worth of food.
And you have ballast in the hull of the boat, which is your fresh water. Great
question. So I was, you know, this is 2005, right? So this is a long time ago, and I was in the it was the early stages of solar panels that were flexible and mobile. Very concerned about always having 3 levels of redundancy. I think my military training has always taught me that. You know, the concept of 1 is none, so 2 is 1, and 3 is essentially, so you've got your all your levels of redundancy there. So we had our desalination pump, which was run by battery powered, then being recharged by the solar panels. Then on top of that, we had a lithium ion battery that we carried with us as a reserve. On top of that, then we had a water hand pump that if those 2 levels of redundancy broke, we could rely on that. And then on top of that, ballast of just simply water bottles bought for 10p a water bottle, you know, and a huge quantity of water, probably to give us enough for 10 or 15 days worth of water if we chose to dip into it. And that came to a really interesting decision point as we were going around Scotland, where we were running low on battery, and I started to ration the guys down on water, which ended up leading into kind of quite an interesting kind of conflict within the team.
And tell us, I'm going to pause to hear the story of the conflict and reflect back to our sponsors. Have you ever dreamt of going to the World Rowing Championships? It's huge fun if you've never been, seeing the best in the world racing in front of your eye. In 2019, it's going to be in Linz in Austria, and we want to make your dream bigger and better. How about arriving to watch the World Championships by boat, specifically a rowing boat? Touring rowing is a great way to have an active rowing holiday while also taking in the sights as you travel. The Row Tours team has designed 3, 4 and 6 day packages. All include Danube rowing before the World Championships begin. There's a full luxury package and a low budget high fitness package where you'll row 50 kilometers a day for 2 days. And there's also a cycling package if you have a partner who's not a rower and you want to summit the Kitzbühel in the Edelweiss and the Hinterglemm in the Austrian Alps. The holiday includes accommodation, meals and airport transfers from Vienna or Salzburg. And importantly, once you get to the World Championships, the Row Tours team will also give you a bike so that you can ride to the course each day. Row Tours is run by Pete Wells, a British rowing Olympian. He's designed rowing adventures, holidays and challenges, as well as bespoke rowing camps to suit all budgets and all ages. For more information and pricing, go to rowtours.com/rowing-chat. Now back to William de Laszlo. William, you're going to tell us about the conflict. What actually happened in the north of Scotland when you were running low on water?
I think it was just an interesting moment in the dynamics of the crew where things were getting tough. we were coming up to the home straight over halfway point, and I'd made a call to ration down water intake because, again, we still had no idea, although we were way ahead of any expected time, we still had no idea how long that kind of final leg of the journey was going to go. And that caused an interesting dynamic within the crew, because there was ultimately, kind of unhappiness around that decision. Admittedly, we had a lot of ballast. We had levels of redundancy, and it got to kind of quite a head where one of the team didn't particularly want to continue rowing anymore without having their say. And I think the important thing that I learned from that dynamic was communication is so important all the way around. And I think one of the things that helped us so much as a team to diffuse that was having a regular slot where it was every day. We always had a 15 minutes of downtime where we stopped rowing, because bearing in mind we were rowing 3 hours on, 3 hours off during the day, 2 hours on, 2 hours off during the night. But during that period, we had one moment every day where we all sat down as a team to discuss our achievements, our differences, to discuss issues that we might be having. And that was absolutely crucial in terms of making sure that the team gelled together.
And so you as the skipper realised that there was something going on, because in that 15 minutes, one of your colleagues raised it. Yeah. And it was, you're making a call and you're making a judgment, and then how to diffuse that, and ultimately was kind of diffused by the giving up of two of the members of the team decided to say, oh fine, I'll kind of almost forgo my rations if you guys want to have yours. And that actually deflated the whole thing very quickly, because there was this balance of no, that we okay, fine, no, we'll crack on, and literally the day later the sun comes out, water pump's working again, and it's all forgotten about. So the water pump stopping working was what triggered it? Exactly. So water pump stopping working was what triggered it. And the reason why the water pump stopped working was because we had very poor weather. One of the team members was brilliant. It was like, we're going to get to Scotland, the weather's going to be crap, and it's going to stay crap. And it was unbelievable. And ultimately we just didn't have enough power to be able to charge up the battery. But look, we had levels of redundancy, and I reflect back, and maybe I made the wrong call. Maybe I was being too cautious. And as I said, we had a lithium-ion battery that we could have kind of dipped into, but I made the call that I just didn't know how long it was going to take us to get home on that home leg. It's very interesting how the team dynamic works out like that, and it brings to mind a parallel that I have heard from lightweight rowers, which I am not, and obviously you aren't either. In a lightweight crew, say 4 people, they all have to hit an average weight. There's a maximum, and I think nowadays there's also a minimum. And I recall a conversation with a friend who was, it's extremely tense. If you don't make weight, you do not race. And of course you have trained to race. And this woman told me that one of her crew members, in the night before the race, they have a discussion. And in general, the way things work is the average weight is known. The individual heights and body masses and fat levels of each of the crew members is assessed, and a target weight is agreed for each of them. The night before the race, it was clear something was not going well and someone was not going to make their target weight. And remember, we're talking grams here, a couple of 100 grams makes all the difference. And she said to me, one of my crew members knew that if she fasted, she could lose an extra amount of weight, and she would gift that to me. And a little bit like you and your colleagues who offered to give up your own supplies of water in order to maintain the team objective and goal. He said, it brought me to tears. He said, no one in all my years of rowing had ever offered to give me weight. And that was a critical moment, obviously, in their crew, as well. And that balance of, I suppose, psychology, selflessness in the face of the shared goal enabled the outcome to happen. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Well, yeah, he's told very eloquently. I think you're right. It's the selflessness which often can diffuse a situation, and certainly, yeah, in the army, definitely situations like that where soldiers offer to carry weight for fellow soldiers if there's a kind of dispute or argument of heavy loads. And I think personally, it demonstrates good leadership to be able to take on that burden of responsibility or burden of weight or burden of loss of food. Shackleton did it, Scott did it in terms of rationing down their own food first as they moved into adversity. I have to say this is nothing like the equivalent of Shackleton or Scott, because those are extraordinary journeys and adventures. But I think there's many lessons that can be learned from that style of leadership, which is about selflessness. Absolutely.
Now, you've made much of your military training, and I'm fascinated because I personally have no background in the military, but I am told that the military is an extremely good education. How does the army teach you and train you for the unexpected?
That's it. I think, first and foremost, the army teaches you for the unexpected by being the best you can be, and that is drilled into you with the amount of training and preparation to deal with the unexpected. So through every pre-operational phase of your career in the army, in pre-operations, that means before you're deployed into a conflict scenario or peacekeeping scenario, the training, certainly for the British Army, and I know actually also for the New Zealand Army, is second to none. And the British Army, I have to say, is, in my personal opinion, is still and will remain one of the best armies in the world. And the way they train their soldiers throughout it is extraordinary, and that is all about preparation and planning for the unexpected. Then I think it turns into leadership, and I think that's the second phase of dealing with the unexpected. But then that comes through experience of being thrown, often during your training exercises or training pieces, being thrown the unexpected at you, and then having to manage and deal with that in a systematic way. So I kind of answer the.
It begins to answer the question. So let's imagine you presumably scenario plan for outcomes, and you say, what if this happens, we can do this, and if this happens, we can do that. You talked about your crucial 15 minutes a day where the crew all down tools to talk together. As the skipper, the leader yourself, did you ask for opinions, or did you ask for solutions, or both? And how did you achieve an outcome? Was it consensual, or did you always choose the path forward?
Yeah, okay. Delving into kind of the team dynamics, and that's a really, really important point in any team. And I think the important point which I've taken into my civilian life as well is delineation of responsibility, and actually having individuals within our team specifically on the boat also applies within small units and small training units within the army, where everybody knows their responsibilities. So in the army, you might have a radio operator, and his responsibility is comms. And even if you're in charge of that individual, you're looking to him to help you make a decision, or for him to make that decision. And I think when I was organising the rowing, I think that's one of the things that I took away, actually, having read Shackleton's book and being incredibly inspired by his Endeavour expedition. And I looked at how he gave responsibility to individuals, and then he asked those individuals for their advice. So, for example, I had a crew member who was specifically focused on navigation. So ultimately, it was his call to advise and instruct on navigation, although I might be able to overrule that. One of the team members was all about rowing and technique, and one was all about ration and supplies. And so everybody had their individual areas of responsibility. And with that, then they're talking freely and openly around their areas and levels of expertise. And I think as the person who's trying to orchestrate it, it's relying and leaning on them to making sure they feel not only responsible, but also gelled into the team environment.
In rowing, land rowing, not adventure ocean rowing, it's one of the unusual sports that we have no team captains. I have very rarely been in a crew where there's been a nominated captain. And as a rowing coach, I have, on occasion, had, let's say, a challenging individual who doesn't smoothly blend into the organization and work ethic, particularly of the rest of the group. And one of the solutions that I have tried, and which has been successful in the past, is to pick that individual out and to give them some leadership responsibility. And it's very interesting how their focus changes away from themselves and toward the team when they have a specific role and you push them onto a podium at which they say, you know, now will you update the team on this particular aspect? Have you ever used that tactic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really, creating teams is hard. Leading teams is really hard. And within that, everybody needs to have within the team, everybody needs to have their kind of areas of responsibility. Otherwise, if you put yourself into that individual's position, is he participating and making the boat go faster, or is he, to use a phrase of an Olympic medalist, or is he just a carrier? So is he just kind of going along with the flow? And I think to make someone feel engaged, giving everybody a level of responsibility, doesn't matter how small, you know, it's his responsibility to be looking after the washers on the boat, or his responsibility to making sure water bottles are filled up, or expanding it to hydration within the team. I think all of those it gives people a feeling of self-worth beyond, and that self-worth then leading into the overall objectives of what you're trying to achieve.
As a leader, can you think of another situation where our listeners might be able to use some of your expertise for their own benefit? What are another, I want to say tip or trick, but that's not really the right words. What's another strategy that you can employ in order to help make a team effective and as a working unit?
I think often this depends with there's many tools that can be applied, things that I've applied that have worked effectively. That balance between work and play, and making sure that team is bonding not only during the work process, but also the play process as well. And that could be making sure you're doing events or activities that aren't just solely focused around what the objective or goal is, whether it be taking the team out bowling and inviting their girlfriends along. So that's the connecting at the emotional level, as well as the end objective, whatever that state is. The army, you can apply that by organizing a drinks evening for the guys, and they're getting their girlfriends along, or and there's many bowling or stuff that we used to do, extracurricular activities, taking the guys on a 2-day skiing trip, so before you go away on deployment. So you're bonding at an emotional level and at a different level to the seriousness of whatever the objective is, and that is a very powerful way of pulling a team together. And I think, and that also then helps them get to know each other at a deeper level. Other things that I've used in the past, drilling. And what I mean by drilling is preparing for the unexpected, going through scenarios, visualization techniques, talking the team, a team through that, of what might happen and what would be our response if that situation did play out. and the importance of just practice, just absolute time of practice again. But that's all about putting the those guys who are committed to continue to go on with the flow of whatever the core objective is.
William, that's brilliant. Thank you. Now let's move on to what happens next. You have an organisation now called the GB Rowing Challenge. What's it doing?
Good question. Good. GB Row Challenge. GBRowChallenge.com is I thought we'd celebrate the 15 years since the rowing race was first achieved, and we ended up. So what I've done is we're going to run the race again, and there's a number of world records up for grabs. There's a 2-man world record for rowing around the UK. There's a ladies only world record as a 4-man crew for rowing around the UK. And then there's the 4-man crew for rowing around the UK. Nobody's ever done it as a single. And so that would be a couple of people who have attempted it, but never got all the way around. But that would be an amazing thing to do. So yeah, GB Row Challenge is a kind of an event that's going to run in 2020, June 2020. And for all those rowing enthusiasts who want to try something that is extraordinary and amazing to see Great Britain, England from the outside in, it's I would just highly recommend it, and recommend it as a race as an event that is really challenging, extraordinarily rewarding at the end. And probably one of the toughest rowing races in the world, or rowing events, I should say, because it's not technically allowed to be a race.
And how long does it take to plan and prepare? You've said 6 months, and this event is June 2020. So expressions of interest are needed by when?
Today, tomorrow. No, I think the expressions of interest can come in as and when, but realistically, there's a lot of ocean rowing boats out there that can be adapted for this type of event, and which is really fortunate, I think, for crews that would be interested or excited about doing something really challenging. And so, kind of with that in mind, I think you can do it with 6 months worth of preparation. I think you probably could do it with 3 or 4 months worth of preparation. It's very challenging for people who have work commitments to get the time off. We did a very worryingly limited amount of time as a team on the water prior to it, but it's one of those things that you really learn when you're on the water as a team of how it all unfolds. The preparation beforehand is key when it comes to fitness and making sure you have the right kit and equipment.
Now, you got a Guinness World Record.
I have. Look at that. Amazing.
But I believe it's been superseded. What happened?
It has been superseded, and so I always thought that it'd be great to have a GB Row Challenge as an event, and we entered. After doing it initially, I left the army, went into civilian life, and I always thought I'm only going to do it as an event when I have enough money to properly fund it. And I thought I'd do it myself because I know how I want it to be run. And I had an entrepreneur who came to me and said, "Oh, let's do it." And here you go. Here's a little bit of money to do it, to set it up as an event. And it kind of worked, but didn't work because they pulled out, and then I had to subsidize it. But what happened was we managed to get, there was I think 7 boats who started in 2013. And and there was a crew, there was a 4-man crew called the Islanders, and they were great team of all ex-rowers, and they had a target, and there was an element of support that we gave them to making sure they navigated the similar route to how we navigated it, and they beat us by, I think, 6 hours. So literally one tide. So I think they did it in 26 days, 14 hours, and we did it in 26 days, 21 hours. So maybe that's not, is that 6 hours? 7 hours.
And you want to run it again? So
well, you see, I think being 40 this year, I think this is my one and only chance to see if we can see if I can take that record back, and I would be delighted to get around. I'll be even more delighted if I manage to get the record back, and even more delighted if there was a huge number of teams doing it for various causes, and especially for raising money for charity, which is dear to them. So for me, it's one of those events that, and it really is an event. You know, it's taking part and getting around. That is an achievement in itself. Less people have climbed Everest. Sorry, more people have climbed Everest than have rode around the UK, and successfully, unsupported. And you know, there's only probably 4, 8, 12. There's only 14 people that have ever rode around the UK. So if you want to get your name on the Hall of Fame, that's do something that very few people have done.
Now, tell the listeners where they can connect with you online.
They can connect with me online by going to the gbrowchallenge.com website, and it's simply gbrowchallenge.com, and on there's expressions of interest or registering your details. And if you're an individual that is looking for a boat, absolutely send in your details, because I think as the momentum builds towards the race, we'll be able to partner people up within crews. And I fully recognize that part of the challenge for any individual wanting to do something like this is finding the money for the boat. So what I'm desperately trying to do is, I've got a number of sponsors that are looking to come on board. So we're going to try and buy 4 boats for competitors. And so therefore you're lowering that barrier to entry. Because I think for me, part of this is trying to make the unachievable achievable, trying to show sometimes even really hard things are actually not that hard. And if you can lower the barriers to entry, especially when it comes to finances, I think you can sometimes, ordinary people, and I include myself as part of that, doing extraordinary things. I think it's a really compelling story. The women's crew, they were called the Seagulls, and they, for me, were the absolute example of a team that came together. There was an extraordinary woman there who was disabled on the boat, so she couldn't use her legs particularly well, and that was a team that they got round in 51 days, and that was, there was a nurse on board, one navigator, one girl who hadn't rowed before, and that was, not demising their abilities, but it was good, strong, ordinary people doing something extraordinary, and that inspired so many people off the back of that. For me, that was just an unbelievable story.
William, it's been a delight. Thank you for giving your time and coming on Rowing Chat. For the listeners, please subscribe. Go to iTunes, go to the Google Play Store, Stitcher, we're on Spotify. Find us online, and please tell your friends. Our website is rowing.chat, and you can choose to receive an email which will advise you when new episodes are published. They're also just on the website, so you don't have to have a podcast app. You can listen through a web browser. And please send me your ideas and suggestions for interviewees that you'd like me to talk to in the future. I'm Rebecca Caro. Until next time, goodbye.